I'm going to try and share something. I don't know how it will go and how it will come out. It's about what's called borderline personality disorder and the process of that you might call awakening, but it's more exactly called the process of coming into union or the coming into yoga, because the yoga tradition is talking actually about coming into a kind of union with the level of consciousness which is the most fundamental, the most basic. And maybe it sounds really strange what I'm saying, borderline personality and the spiritual process of coming into union. How do they relate? And it sounds strange, but I'm going to try and make it as simple as possible. The thing is, some people have a relatively balanced personality that is both emotionally balanced, which means they are very fundamentally capable of managing their own emotions, and they're not afraid of their emotions, and then they don't get so overwhelmed by their emotions. But usually those people I'm referring to are also adaptive in their relational sense, which means they're quite good at relationships. They know how to sustain relationships that work. But some people don't know how to sustain relationships that work. The whole arena of having relationships feels to them pretty volatile and pretty painful. And also some people have a hard time managing their emotions. They get overwhelmed easily. They might be oversensitive, or what's called a very sensitive person. But they also might match the borderline personality disorder criteria, which means they don't only are overly sensitive, they are also, they feel easily overwhelmed to a large extent by their emotions, which disrupts their emotional balance and also disrupts their relational life, and their general aspects of their life. I've come to understand that I'm one of those people, that I would probably qualify more at my younger years, but even today to some extent, to the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. And to explain it simply, what it means for me is that all along my life, it was very tricky for me to feel emotionally balanced and stable. I'm very sensitive, and I experienced most of my life a lot of emotional ups and downs. And another thing is that I found it very tricky and complicated to feel at ease with the relational part of my life, which means, simply put, I found it hard to be happy in relationships, sustain them, and even when I was in relationships, it was very volatile and very up and down and stormy for me, which eventually at about the age, I'm 52 now, and at about the age of 35-ish, I started receding from having any close relationships, because something in me that I couldn't quite name understood that I'm not good at it, and it's not contributing to my well-being to be in close personal relationship, especially romantic ones. But also friendships didn't quite work for me. So that's me coming out about being some kind of borderline personality. I don't care saying it because it's for a foreign audience, not in my own country. And I can delete this video whenever I can if I don't want this to be out there. So what does that have to do with the spiritual process and with the process of integrating our the whole of our aspects as a human being, physical, emotional, and mental, into kind of a perspective of unity, which can be titled the spiritual process or yoga. What does that have to do with being a borderline? Well, I think it has to do with it because when you can't find well-being where most people find it, in close relationships, when you feel unstable emotionally, when you feel unstable in your social connections, when you feel alone, a few things happen. One thing is you doubt yourself a lot because you understand over time that you are not so successful in life like others. It disrupts your personal life, it disrupts your professional life, and you ask yourself a lot of questions. You might ask yourself a lot of questions about what's wrong, why is this not working? And also there's emotional suffering, distress. There might be feeling of anxiety, there might be feeling of frustration, and there might be also depression. I certainly had a low level of depression for years and years. And it's a rough ride. And that's why this condition, borderline personality disorder, is considered to be difficult because people suffer. And then one of the things that might, if you're spiritually inclined for some reason, it might fuel your spiritual process of seeking. For me, it certainly did that. And it kind of pushed me into self-inquiry at deeper and deeper levels, partly because I wasn't aware of this whole subject of personality disorders. No one diagnosed me, although I was in therapy for quite a few years and with a few therapists. No one offered me this diagnosis. No one shared with me those insights. So I couldn't name it in psychology jargon. And I just went seeking for answers, not only answers, but solutions, actually. I went for seeking for healing for my distress. I didn't always admit there was distress. I didn't always know how to name my distress. I didn't know always to admit I was suffering in relationships, although I was. But the seeking was really intense. And a part of it was like something pulling me, like an attraction to spiritual content. But certainly, something also was pushing me from behind, which was my suffering. So, what am I saying here? I'm saying that when you can't feel at ease in your life, when there's a lot of emotional strife, where there's discomfort, and it's hard to come to rest in relationships, to satisfaction in relationships, that can uh, push us like from behind to seek solutions and answers in other arenas. And when we have a spiritual inclination, it's all the more likely that we go seeking in the spiritual direction. So today I'm like, I know what I didn't know then, and I have knowledge, psychological knowledge, and I understand how to describe my problem, how to call it. I have all this lens of personality disorder to look through, and it's very recent for me, because I basically, through a happenstance, I kind of came to this knowledge, and I came to be open to this knowledge, which is not easy because it's really hard to admit. If you know how it is to have a personality disorder, you'll know that to admit those things about yourself is hard. It's difficult. So I came to, in the right time, I came to this knowledge when I was already very into very years long self-inquiry and observation, that I could admit about myself those distinctions and criteria, and I could put my finger on it and say, aha, I have this. Or at least I had it most of my life, and it's more mellow today, but I'm still suffering from aspects of it, and I'm still suffering from the repercussions of living with it so many years, even health repercussions. So the fact that I know, what I'm saying is, the fact that I know now doesn't necessarily help me. Well, it helps to, I would say, an extent, but then it's not so easy to solve a personality disorder. It requires a lot of therapy, which costs a lot of money if you want a good therapist. And I did find a good therapist, but I can say that I can pay them just for a short period of time to give me some support. And then I have to continue on my own because I cannot afford what I need, which I think the ideal situation would be like to have like 5 years of therapy now with someone who matches me, which I gel with, and which has the tools to help. And so it's not so easy. And you can, having the information, it goes a long way, but it takes time until you can actually use the information that you get. Today, there are many tools that weren't in the past. I think if I knew about personality disorder 10 years or 15 years ago, it wouldn't help me as much as it helps me now, because today there is the DBT therapy, which is very practical and very hands-on and helps a lot with self-regulation and with just understanding how to live well with those tendencies, which wasn't the case. It came to be only in the last few years, and I'm glad to know about it now. But it takes time to implement the information. So meanwhile, I have all this spiritual like path that I went through, and insights and understandings about myself, specifically, and self with a capital S in general, at my expense. And I can say that there is something very helpful in having that spiritual path for someone like me, because I cannot like go like this and make myself borderline. But spirituality I see spirituality, one major way to see spirituality for me is a practice of more and more going inwards and relying on the inner realm of the persona. So you can say a difference between an unspiritual person and a spiritual person, in a way, a true spiritual. I'm not talking about religious that goes to church but doesn't have spiritual life in them and is not going through spiritual transformation. But I'm talking about true spirituality, which involves real spiritual transformation. So the direction of spiritual transformation is inward. So the difference between a non-spiritual person and a spiritual one is the spiritual one goes more and more inwards. They face all their what's inside, and what is inside with the person inside is thoughts, feelings, sensations, or emotions, and emotional patterns and physical patterns that are expression mostly of emotional patterns and thought patterns. And this person turns inside, faces all those patterns, and also inquires into their self-identity. This inquiry of identity and inquiry about patterns, they go together. If you start inquiring about identity, you'll be faced with your patterns. And if you start inquiring and looking and observing into your patterns, thought, feeling, and physical, you'll come across identity inquiry. So this comes together if you want it or not. And eventually they come together. It takes time, but you have to face them both. And this is the spiritual person. The spiritual person comes to a process of unification of and integration of all their aspects. And they come also into something called enlightenment, which is a deep understanding and realization about their deepest and realist identity. That's the spiritual process for me. And basically, what you do when you turn inwards in that manner, one of the things that happen is that you rely less and less on outward things like relationships, like success, like social I lost the word, but society, what people think of you. And of course you have necessities, of course you have needs, but some of those needs start to be sourced from within. You can't eat lunch from within, you know, from just the spiritual process. You still have to eat. But emotional needs partially can be sourced from within because it's a process of integration. There's a connection that starts to be created, and there's a kind of inner poverty. Inner poverty can be a term that can be understood in different ways. But what I'm referring to now is like there's a kind of inner poverty for a person that only relies on outer circumstance to feel happy. And when you go within and you start being engaged inwardly very much with self-observation and self-understanding, self-acceptance blossoms. And when self-acceptance blossoms, it's a kind of a richness that starts to be first as a potential, then flickering of transformation process, and eventually a blossoming of self-acceptance. And there's a kind of harmony that is really, really, through a difficult process, start to flourish from inside. And that gives a kind of base or plethora of inner richness which you didn't have before. So for a person that has difficulty to regulate themselves, feel just good in themselves when they're with other people, use the relationships as a source of regulation, and also experience when someone has difficulty experiencing well-being because they are successful in life, or they do what they want to do and they get what they want to get in the outward life. When someone has problems with that, developing this inner connection with self, this very gradually building this baseline of self-acceptance and inner harmony and understanding is crucial. It can make a huge difference. And then one of the things that I can see for myself is that the definitions of heaven and hell change, of good and bad, what I want to get in life and what I don't want, they change. If before I was looking for heaven outside, you know, in what I have in life, either in relationship or in success, social success, or financial, or professional success. Now that looking for well-being outside of myself it becomes very clear that looking for it outside is hell. It is my hell, because from experience, my own personal experience, my experience is I cannot rely on that because it doesn't work. So the definition of hell for me is when I look for heaven outside. And the definition of heaven for me is when I keep it in my pants, you know, when I keep my connection to myself stable inside, when I hold my awareness in connection with my own experience inside me, when I plug into myself, it becomes the definition of heaven. Why? Because if we think about heaven as a place of goodness, as a place of stable source of a resource, a stable resource of goodness and stability, my experience as a borderline is that whenever I throw myself outside of myself, I go like berserk. Everything goes like awry because I don't have one of the traits of borderline is that you get out of sorts easily, or in other words, you don't have a stable sense of self. You kind of get out of your balance easily. Something happens and it throws you to very extreme emotions in the outer arena. So when I let myself throw myself at life and try to get satisfaction from that, I feel very empty. very easily, very fast. I feel like I don't have a stable ground to stand on. And I go out of sorts. So you can understand how this is not a good experience. It's not pleasant, I can tell you. And I've learned, just my experience showed me that I don't like it. I don't like feeling like that. However, when I keep my awareness on myself, yeah, and at least divide my awareness between myself, it's a kind of holding that I hold myself in awareness. I try to do it all the time, and I try to have practices that keep me plugged in that way. And I give only the necessary partial awareness to what's happening outside myself. I work, I function, everything, but I don't expect for my well-being to come to me from outer circumstances. And I keep my expectation only on feeling what I feel, being aware of what I think. There's a kind of stable state that starts to build, to kind of gather and crystallize. And it's not easy to sustain, but when I more or less sustain it to a sufficient level, that gives me a sense of well-being and stability, which I cannot get otherwise. So the definition of heaven, well, it has levels, but the less I I'm losing a word again. The less I expect my circumstances to give me well-being, the more I'm in heaven. The less I expect or rely, that's the word I was missing. The less I rely, the more I'm in heaven. And then when I'm stable, I can feel into how can I more step into life, be less introverted, be more engaged also with life, with people. And I can like check the waters and see, am I close to drowning? What's the level of practice and of self-holding that I need to keep that stability going, so I can still say, I'm keeping in touch with my inner heaven, so I won't fall into hell. And that has a lot of aspects to it. But one thing that I want to stress is that it changes all the time. It, in different periods of life, depends on how stressful situations are at play, and how maybe it can be even given to things like hormonal changes, health changes. In different times, call for different levels of plugging in, of introversion for me. The more I stressed, I need more to be more introverted and more like stable and keep this holding. So it becomes like a kind of a dialogue between my practice, what they call in Hindi or yoga tradition, my sadhana, the practice, the sadhana, and the outward life conditions. And there's a kind of dance, there's a kind of dialogue that it's like when life throws at me too much challenge and I'm overwhelmed, I already know the drill. I already know that the way for me to come through the situation is to slow down and to plug in, be more introverted, and really put a stress on my practices. Do self-regulation, do yoga, do whatever, meditation, whatever gives me physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual stability. Like unplug from the outside, because the outside it's destabilizing right now. But for me, as a borderline, I don't like saying of myself, I'm a borderline, you know? But as someone that has borderline traits, this dance is really intense because it can change by the day or by the week, you know? For other people, it can change once in a year. They have some crisis for a month, and basically their emotional system is not so sensitive and not so volatile that they need too much of those movements inside, back and forth. But for someone with borderline traits, what they call borderline traits, we have to be very mindful of our need to slow down and just take ourselves into our self-holding and do self-regulations and work with ourselves and stabilize ourselves, because we get away from stability quite easily. So I can tell you, like 2 days ago, I'm having, as suitable to my age, I'm having hormonal changes. And sometimes I just start to have food binges that are just uncontrolled. I have a tendency for eating disorder of binging, but I didn't have too much trouble with it for the last few years. It wasn't very intense. It was there, but it wasn't very intense. And lately with the hormonal changes, it's crazy. And I don't think it's only emotional. It always is always also emotional, but I'm not identifying it so much as emotional as much as it is hormonal. So just 2 days ago, I had this kind of food binge. And when I binge with food, I get out of balance emotionally and mentally very fast. And I feel distress. And I have my practices how to get a hold of the reins again. It all involves working with myself. And those practices of yoga, meditation, self DBT tools, and self regulation tools, which yoga and meditation will self-regulate you. Mindfulness meditation, I really recommend. And other things I do, walking, sports, dancing. I know already how to catch the reins of my imbalance. So I think, to sum it up, I'm saying that I think what I'm trying to reveal here is how what you might call borderline personality disorder traits fueled, in a way, my spiritual process along many, many years, and how actually spiritually inclined teachings like yoga, like meditation, like even Ayurvedic and nutrition and lifestyle and the Ayurvedic system, all those things that are spiritually inclined, even practices like observing um, observing certain moral principles that this exists in many religions and teachings. Even this, all these things are can contribute as tools to balance those borderline traits. So the two fields of experience can kind of contribute each other. The borderline pushes you to practice more, can push you, and the practices help you deal with the borderline. Of course, you have to be cautious of the kind of teachers and the kind of teachings you use, you approach, and you give your life and attention to. Make sure it's reliable and that it's oriented around well-being. Always oriented around well-being, because I've learned also from experience that when I go to a spiritual teacher or a teaching, and it's too extreme, and it takes me to it offers me an extreme path, an extreme way of looking at things, very polarized. For me, it's destabilizing, and it doesn't worth almost anything except some life experience. But it doesn't help me, and it doesn't contribute me, and it's not beneficial. And I've learned to pick and choose my teachings and teachers, and to make sure that they're not narcissistic, and they care about people, and they care about your stability. Too polarized, too radical teachers don't care about your stability. They just don't care. And you can identify that quite easily if you put your mind to it. So the spiritual field is a jungle. So my suggestion is you have to take care and choose wisely who you connect to. Okay? And you can try and learn by experience, as I did, but I'm quite resilient. All things considered, I'm quite resilient. So be mindful. If you're very, very sensitive, be mindful about who you get close to as per spiritual teachers and teachings. That's all I have to say today. Thank you for listening. If you did, I hope it's beneficial, and see you. Bye.